Welcome to the Merowitz Center this morning. I am going to introduce Dale Sharon this morning, who is our presenter. Um, Dale is a 25-year docent at the St. Louis Art Museum, a SLAM Board of Trustees member, and an exhibited artist for a series that this series will look at the Jewish touchpoints at the St. Louis Art Museum. This series, which will be offered through September, will brush up on Judaica. I'm sorry if I'm not saying that right. On Jewish artists and on biblical stories, all in the content text of works from the permanent collection of the St. Louis Art Museum. And as Dale is presenting today, we will keep everybody muted. And if you have a question that comes up along the way, you can type it in the chat and we will cover Dale will cover all the questions at the end of the presentation. Dale, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you very much, Judy. And welcome back, everyone. And welcome to those of you who are new to the program. I want to thank you all for joining us for part 2 as we brush up on Jewish art in the St. Louis Art Museum. Now, I hope all of you are well, and I hope you're all staying safe. First, before we begin today, I would like to thank the Merowitz Center and the Jewish Life for co-sponsoring this series. I truly appreciate their collaboration and their support in bringing this program to all of you. And secondly, some disclaimers. As I said before, my familiarity and expertise revolves around art. My knowledge about Judaism is about 100 miles wide and maybe about an inch deep. I'm not an authority, not a specialist in Jewish history. And I certainly cannot vouch for my pronunciation of many of the names and places we'll talk about today. Somehow, no matter how I pronounce the word, I cannot escape my Midwestern Missouri accent. And I certainly take no responsibility for my husband's puns. So please feel free to add any comments or corrections that would add to our conversation today, and we'll talk about them at the end of the presentation. Okay. Last month, in our first foray into Jewish art, we looked at 3 Jewish touch points relating to art in the St. Louis Art Museum: biblical stories, Jewish subjects, and Judaica. And we've seen that Jewish art comes in different colors or textures or sizes. There are thousands of ways it can manifest, and it doesn't fit inside a one-size-fits-all box. We're shining a spotlight on many more of them today, and the art couldn't be more different. The medley of objects we'll see this morning in some way connect the art of the St. Louis Art Museum with biblical stories and Jewish history. And as demonstrated in this cartoon, there can also be humor in Old Testament history. This battered little boy says, "We had an Old Testament skit today. Al Sims was the Hittite and I was the Hittite," which I thought was kind of cute. Anyway, our intent this morning is to look at the art in the St. Louis Art Museum as it takes us to the patriarchs and to Persia, to Abraham and Assyria, to Canaan and the Crusades. I love alliteration. So my plan today is to relate art objects from SLAM's permanent collection to biblical stories and Jewish history. The objects are not made by Jews, nor are they Jewish ritual objects or subjects. The connection is simply Jewish history, the events of our Jewish past that relate to a particular place or a particular time, linking to a work of art in SLAM. So stay with me as we follow the history of Judaism in the context of these pieces of art. I suppose you might say we're about to become time travelers, because in the next hour, we're going to be looking at 5,000 years of art and history. So fasten your seatbelts because we are going really, really fast. Let's begin in the ancient world. Somewhere in the desert, about 6500 BC, emerged one of the earliest civilizations on record, Mesopotamia. It was Greek for the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where so much of our civilization developed. You've heard it described as part of the Fertile Crescent, a little bow-shaped strip of territory that is today part of Syria, Turkey, Kuwait, and Iraq. Here are the empires of Sumeria, Babylonia, and Assyria, and you can see where they're located on this map. Some of the world's earliest cities were constructed here, along with what's likely the world's oldest writing system. In ancient times, Mesopotamia impacted the world through its inventions and innovations in astronomy, mathematics, and architecture. And here was the history which made it the holy place for three powerful religions. This little Fertile Crescent was where it all began. Biblically, this was the location of the Garden of Eden. I didn't know this, but Eden was the Mesopotamian word for plain. This was also the place where Abraham was born. The patriarchs lived here between 2500 and 1400 BC. So this place really was the nursery of our heritage. This bull's head from 2600 BC is the oldest piece in Slam's collection from the city of Ur in Sumeria in Mesopotamia. We don't know specifically how this copper bull's head would have been used. It may have been part of a piece of furniture or a harp or a series of temple guard animals. The number of curls on his beard represent royalty, and the bull, of course, symbolizes fertility and power. Figures such as this served as an ever-present symbol of divine protection through centuries of ancient Near Eastern art. This bull's head, then, denotes the place where it all began, the beginning, the genesis, if you will, of our heritage. Egypt has played a large part in our Jewish history. The Jewish people had a long and tangled connection with this place called Egypt. One of the earliest and grandest civilizations of the ancient world, Egypt figures prominently in our biblical narrative. It is mentioned in the Bible almost 700 times, making it the second most frequently mentioned place in the Bible. According to the Bible, Joseph and the Israelites were welcomed into Egypt around the 16th century BC, after their homeland in Canaan was stricken by drought and famine. However, most of the events surrounding Egypt described in the Bible are set in the Egyptian era known as the New Kingdom, from the 16th to the 11th century BC. By this time, Egypt was already an ancient civilization, and the pyramids were already a couple of thousand years old. According to several biblical passages, the Israelites spent about 400 years of enslavement in Egypt. That period of captivity is the basis for the biblical view of Egypt as a place of slavery. It came to an end with, of course, the Exodus, the liberation of the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt, using biblical dates most probably around the 13th century BC. Although biblical scholars and archaeologists argue about various aspects of Israel's exodus from Egypt, most of them agree that the exodus occurred in some form or another. The theme of a real people achieving freedom from oppression is mentioned over and over again in various parts of the Bible. Even people who know little about the Bible likely can recount the story of Moses leading the Israelites from Egypt in an extraordinary exodus. And since you all certainly know the story, let's move on to take a look at this gorgeous mummy mask that was made in Egypt around the same time as the Exodus. Now, Egyptians were not interested in individualized facial details in their sculptures, but instead they were interested in a person's role or their position in society. The spine carving and the materials of this mummy mask tell us that this lady was an important woman in Egypt. The face is not a portrait of the deceased, but instead an idealized representation, complete with the gold skin of the gods. This handsome mask has an extraordinary presence with its skilled face and realistic wig. The band around her head is inlaid with glass, surprising because glass was as costly and rare as the turquoise and carnelian for which it was substituted. I wasn't exaggerating when I said this mask was gorgeous. You will not believe how stunning this mask is, especially when you think that it's over 3,000 years old. Our story continues back in Mesopotamia several hundred years later. The history of Mesopotamia is imprinted with many invasions by a number of very ambitious and ruthless conquerors. The region was constantly expanded through military conquests, and one of the most powerful and efficient military forces in the ancient world was Assyria. They conquered much of Mesopotamia from 1000 to 612 BC. Simply put, the Assyrian state was forged in war, invasion, and conquest. The army was the largest standing army ever seen in the Mideast or Mediterranean. The Assyrian claim to artistic fame was documentation of these military conquests. Endless reliefs like this one, decorating the interiors of the palace, portrayed the glory of the king, his vast holdings, and his military conquests. Biblically, this was the time of the kings and the building of the temple in 960 BC. The Assyrians were mentioned frequently in the Bible as wicked warriors and known as tough and merciless soldiers. They were said to have, quote, conquered and sacked all the towns and cities in Israel and led away as booty 27,290 inhabitants. They even laid siege to Jerusalem itself, earning them numerous mentions in the Bible. This plaque comes from the palace of King Ashurnasirpal II in Nimrod, Iraq, during that same time period. Ashurnasirpal not only extended his empire, but I think this is really cool, but he also began a project of assembling a library of the tablets of all of the literature of Mesopotamia. 30,000 tablets still remain in Ashurnasirpal's great library in the city of Nineveh. These tablets are our single greatest source of knowledge of Mesopotamian culture. One of the benefits of Zoom is that we can magnify a portion of a painting or sculpture to see the detail. You can't do that in person. So here is a segment of the figure on the Assyrian plaque. Here is the Assyrian plaque, and here is the blow up. This figure is known as a winged genie or a religious spirit, but in reality represents a king watering a date palm tree. It illustrates that the king has the power of life and death over his people. He can symbolically give them water or not. The cuneiform inscriptions throughout the surface of the sculpture expound the Assyrian king's conquests and exploits. Those are those little indentations that you see throughout. That's cuneiform writing. On the right are examples of cuneiform. The wedge-shaped scribblings on these plaques and tablets are written in horizontal lines from left to right, and they often look like little triangles with tails. I can't imagine trying to write a document using this complex system. I mean, talk about a headache. At any rate, the palace would have been painted much like the rendering on the right. Here's what the palace would have looked like. The arrows point to reliefs such as ours. So here is the winged genie that we see here. Imagine the fear you would have felt when walking to the palace rooms, passing through halls lined with these imposing figures as you were trying to gain an audience with a ruthless monarch whose tagline was, quote, destroyer of opposition. Moving 200 years forward at a blistering speed, by the end of the 7th century, the Assyrian Empire had collapsed under the assault of the Babylonians. The first Babylonian Empire was 1,000 years earlier than the cylinder in the days of Hammurabi. That illustrious old city of Babylon had been almost totally destroyed by Assyria, but now once again, Babylon was established as a ruling power in Mesopotamia. The Neo-Babylonian Empire became the most powerful state in the world after defeating the Assyrians in 612 BC. And it was Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon who destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 587 BC. He was king for more than 40 years and is one of the most frequently mentioned royal personages in the Bible. His name occurs more than 90 times. Babylon is mentioned over 200 times. This was the era of the Jewish exile from 597 to 581 BC. And most biblical references during this time are to Nebuchadnezzar, the leveling and looting of the temple, and the expulsion of the Jews. On the other side of the coin, it was Nebuchadnezzar's vision that turned Babylon into the immense and beautiful city of legend. Babylon in the time of Nebuchadnezzar was large even by our standards. The city spread over 200 square miles, roughly the size of the city of Chicago today, and was surrounded by moats and ringed by a double circuit of walls so thick that they had chariot races on top. The river Euphrates, which flowed through the city, passed by the 300-foot high ziggurat that you see right here, stepped ziggurat. I think we're off center here. Let me just see if I can fix it. Did I fix it? I think so. Okay. So the river Euphrates passed by the ziggurat, and that ziggurat is believed to have provided the inspiration for the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. And then the Hanging Gardens of Babylon on the right, a colossal maze of terraced trees and shrubs and waterfalls, is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It must have been an incredible sight. Now, the cylinder documents the record of public works of King Nebuchadnezzar II, cataloging the massive building and restoration projects of Babylon. The Babylonians left many inscriptions, such as this, bearing testimony to its massive building programs. As my husband said, we could Babylon, get it? Okay. We could babble on, but time is in short supply and we have a lot to cover. You can moan, it's okay. So now along comes Persia. When the Persian Empire is referenced today, it's the rule of the Achaemenid Empire that was the most significant and relevant. Even if you mispronounce it, like I'm sure I just have, the history is fascinating. Under the leadership of Cyrus the Great in 559 BC, the Achaemenid Persian Empire was successful militarily. Cyrus reversed a common imperial strategy. He left local rulers in place after conquering a region and allowed the population to continue practicing their preferred religions. Cyrus then allowed the Jews who had been exiled by the Babylonians to return and establish a tributary state in 539 BC. So at this time, under the Persians, Jewish citizens had relative religious freedom. The increased wealth and power of the empire allowed Darius the Great, Cyrus's nephew, to construct a brand new capital city called Persepolis, which in Greek means city of the Persians. As an aside, you might remember that President Kennedy entertained the Shah of Iran in the ruins of Persepolis in the early 60s, kind of like Camelot meets Persia. Darius commissioned sculptors to adorn these buildings with numerous and extravagant stone reliefs like ours. These show tributaries from different parts of the empire processing toward the enthroned king, bringing an offering of food and drink. And you can see them in the photos on the right. Our relief shows just that, a processional bearing gifts or sacrifices. There were over 230 ethnic groups, all bringing gifts to the king, including Jews. Now, there are 2 more important points of connections here. First, the rebuilding of the temple was completed during this time, around 515 BC. It signified the renewal of Jewish life after the devastation of the exile. And second, It is believed that the king of this great empire may have actually been King Ahasuerus, the Hebrew form of his Persian name. Secular history knows him better by his Greek name, King Xerxes I, the son of Darius, who ruled Persia from 486 to 465 BC. His story becomes the basis for the holiday Purim, as told in the book of Esther. So the Achaemenid Persian Empire was highly advanced and tolerant, the first to allow religious freedom throughout its kingdom. Next, Alexander the Great conquers the Mediterranean. These figures illustrate the artistic genius of Greek sculptors. Artistically, no one could beat the Greeks. Man was the measure of all things. It was about perfect proportions for the human body. It was about balance. It was about harmony. It was about realism. The Greeks artistically kind of invented the first supermodel because all sculptures had perfect proportions. Men would be athletic and nude, women delicate in pretty drapery. They were idealized to look like Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston. The Greeks figured out how to make a body look as though it were moving in space. If a foot goes forward, what happens to the hips or the shoulders? Generally speaking, everything made sense. And sculptures actually look like an athlete who was ready to throw a javelin or a woman running in the wind. The Greeks were so adept at rendering textiles that it was said that the Greek sculptor was a better tailor than actual tailors. There's so much to be said about ancient Greece, but we only have time to look at them in terms of Jewish history. So what happened to the Jews after Alexander died? Well, in 332, Alexander the Great destroyed the Persian Empire and largely ignored Judah. After Alexander's death, his generals divided this and subsequently fought over his empire. Between 319 and 302 BC, Jerusalem changed hands 7 times. Initially, the Jews were allowed autonomy, and there was really no serious effort to interfere in their religious affairs. But then, in 175 BC, Antiochus IV seized power and incorporated Judea into his empire. The book of Daniel describes him as, quote, a conqueror of overweening pride, unquote. And eventually he began a program that threatened to force the Jews to abandon their monotheism for Greek paganism. Antiochus could not appreciate the Jewish loyalty to the word of God rather than to a human king. And the central tenets of Judaism were outlawed, and they defied the Holy Temple. Antiochus launched a campaign to crush Judaism, and in 167 BC, he sacked the temple. The Jews rose up and fought for their liberation behind Mattathias and his 5 sons. They were known as the Maccabees, from the Hebrew word for hammer, because they were said to strike hammer blows against their enemies. In 164 BC, Jerusalem was captured by the Maccabees and the temple purified. That, of course, gave birth to the holiday of Hanukkah, and Jews were again masters of their own fate, and for a time secured freedom of worship. One of the most important events of the Hellenistic period is the translation of the Torah into Greek in Ptolemaic Egypt. The whole Bible was translated into Greek by the middle of the 2nd century BC. The Greeks wanted a copy of the Jewish scriptures for the library at Alexandria. From this translation, probably made by the Jews of Alexandria, the Hebrew view of God, of history, of law, and of the human condition spread around the world. Our sculpture of Running Artemis was made around this time, and it again illustrates the amazing skill of the Greek sculptor. The way the dress clings to the body is often called wet drapery, a perfect description. While simultaneously billowing around the figure, it creates an exaggerated sense of movement that's a signature element of sculpture of this time. I think this is one of the most extraordinary sculptures in our entire collection. To think that someone could take a hunk of stone and make you believe that a woman was running in the wind with her dress blowing behind, it's just plain incredible. Well, this is off too. Okay. Is that better? The classical world was most often a dangerous place for Jews, but we should not forget that Jews at times flourished in Roman cities throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Normal life at times was normal. Early on, Rome recognized Judaism as a legal religion, allowing Jews to worship freely, even though the Jews refused to pay homage to Roman gods. Rome did this in part because the Jews had helped Julius Caesar win an important battle. This policy continued under the first Roman emperor, Augustus. However, later Roman officials viewed the Jews with suspicion and persecutions began. Jews refused to make offerings to Roman gods or take part in Roman religious festivals, which Rome considered a matter of showing loyalty. They tested Roman tolerance. One of the most serious conflicts between Rome and the Jews began in Judea in 66 AD when Nero was emperor. The Roman governor of Judea unwisely decided to confiscate a large sum of money from the treasury of the Great Temple in Jerusalem. He claimed he was collecting taxes owed the emperor. Rioting broke out, which Roman soldiers ruthlessly suppressed. This in turn enraged a nationalistic group of Jewish revolutionaries who attacked Roman troops in Jerusalem and elsewhere in the Roman province. Nero sent 3 legions to put down the rebellion. Jerusalem was torched and the population massacred. 12,000 Jews died. At the time, they were 10% of the population of the Roman Empire. 2 years later, the Romans retook Jerusalem and destroyed the Great Temple. The last survivors perished in 73 AD at the mountain fortress of Masada. This bust was made during that time and represents the importance of the individual in Rome, as long as he was a Roman citizen. It's a powerful representation of a male nobleman with a hooked nose and strong cheekbones and small pursed lips. The portrait head is characterized by the popular style of Roman portraiture, which is called warts and all realism. Another perfect name. The laurel wreath on his head demonstrates the importance of this young man, who might have been a poet or an athlete or a military hero. Roman rule continued. Emperor Hadrian issued several repressive edicts against Jews, including one against circumcision. These edicts sparked the Barcode Rebellion. The war began as a guerrilla struggle against Rome in 132. Within a short time, it had spread throughout the country, and by the end of the war, many Jews had been massacred, the land devastated again. Jews were prohibited both the study of the Torah and the observance of the Jewish way of life derived from it. Jews were forbidden to come within sight of Jerusalem. Once a year, on the anniversary of the destruction of the temple, controlled entry was permitted, allowing Jews to mourn at the remaining fragment of the temple site, the Western Wall, which then became known as the Wailing Wall. With the ascension of the next emperor, virtually all of Hadrian's decrees were rescinded. In the latter years of the Roman rule, in the aftermath of the Bar Kokhba revolt, and on the verge of Christianization of the empire, they were extremely fertile ones for the development of Judaism. It was in this period that the Mishnah was collected and committed to writing. Throughout, nothing was as important to ancient Rome as its citizens. Republican Rome embraced imperfection in portraiture because this type of untouched physical representation implied that while there were existing inequalities in each person, that did not change the fact that they were all Romans, but Roman citizens. To that end, these busts shy away from presenting the subject as young athletic men, as you would have seen in Greece, but rather emphasize their individuality. Even the depictions of children were realistic and distinctive. The date is now 313 AD, and Emperor Constantine gave official recognition to Christianity as a legal religion. Constantine moved the Roman capital from Rome to Constantinople about 330, and Christianity became the state church of the Roman Empire. Until the conversion of Constantine, Jews and Christians were both persecuted minorities. Even though there was antipathy toward Jews in the New Testament, it was kind of more like a family squabble. But once Constantine converted, the church had the power to enforce its anti-Jewish rhetoric. Many Christian thinkers wrote treatises negative toward Jews. Indeed, as Erasmus later wrote, if hating Jews is to be a good Christian, then we are all good Christians. The sketch for the church ceiling in Jerusalem is the beginning of it all. It illustrates Constantine's story and conversion to Christianity. It is generally agreed that widespread European persecution of Jews began after Constantine converted to Christianity. Roman Catholic Europe began to develop in ways that would eventually transform it into the most powerful area on the scene. This richly adorned triptych is a fine example of the wealth and opulence and reach of the Catholic Church. Mary, Queen of Heaven, is surrounded by a celestial court of saints and angels. All of the prominent families of medieval Europe had altarpieces such as this, made with architectural gilded frames. Another example of the importance and power of the medieval church. The Middle Ages fall roughly between 400 AD and the fall of Rome to 1400 and the height of the Renaissance. The 1,000-year or so story of medieval Judaism is one in which the Jews lived in a society that was governed by a faith that was not theirs. Thus, even though there were years of tolerance, mostly Jewish subjects were persecuted and their rights restricted. The term medieval tends to conjure up imagery of religious persecution and bloodshed. The Jews of medieval Christian Europe suffered at the hands of Christian warriors during the Crusades, Christian churchmen during the Inquisition, and Christian rulers who confiscated their property and expelled them. In reality, neither medieval society nor Jewish life within it was always dire. There were many times and places in which medieval Jewish people and Jewish cultures thrived. But as Roman Catholic Europe surged, and as the church became more powerful and wealthy, attitudes toward Jews became more and more hostile. This was the attitude of King Louis IX. His strong faith spurred him to treat non-Christians severely. Because of all of the controversy surrounding the sculpture of Louis IX in front of the museum, I thought we would talk about him for a few minutes. The city of St. Louis was named by Pierre Leclerc in 1764 to honor the patron saint of reigning King Louis XV, and his patron saint was Louis IX. Lots of Louis. King Louis IX was a 13th century king of France. He ruled from childhood until his death in 1270 in Tunisia during the Second Crusade. He was often called the Crusader King. His attitude toward non-Christians was ruthless and merciless. In an effort to purify the French kingdom, he burned sacred Jewish texts, which he believed to be insulting to Christians. Additionally, he implemented a decree that required Jews to wear identifying patches. And then there were the Crusades. His hostility and aggression toward Jews, Muslims, and others during the Crusades are the focus of today's debate. He was absolutely brutal and barbaric. Today, his image is everywhere in France. Louis IX, most notably, is revered for purchasing the crown of thorns from Italy for half the gross national product of France. But he's also held in high esteem for founding the University of Paris, as well as hospitals for the poor, homes for battered women and ex-prostitutes, and other charitable institutions that fed and clothed hundreds of Paris's poor. So left unmentioned by Louis' modern detractors is his lifelong devotion to issues of social justice in a world that cared little for such ideas. His reputation is clouded today, however, by his relentless persecution of Jews and non-Christians. This triumphal equestrian image was never meant to depict a medieval saint. Its title says it all. An apotheosis is a coming into greatness or an ascent into glory. And that's what the statue evokes, but it had nothing to do with the Middle Ages. The truth is that this sculpture, which presided over the entrance to the 1904 World's Fair, celebrated a new century of progress. It was a symbol of the city of St. Louis, which in 1904 was one of America's most prosperous urban centers. The attendees of the World's Fair saw in this sculpture the promise of confident progress for St. Louis and the world. Even the sword, with the blade held down in a gesture of peace, was a sign of hope for the future. Those who commissioned the statue and those who viewed it had little interest in medieval kings and the Crusades. They were focused on building a bright and prosperous future. It served as the city's symbol until the completion of the arch. The opulence of the church was in contrast with the barbaric and savage events of the Middle Ages, from the Inquisition to the Crusades. The Processional Cross is a good example of this dichotomy. The detailed decoration on this magnificent cross testifies to the wealth of the church as much as to the importance of the cross in Christian ritual. The first Crusades began in 1096 and spread across Europe and the Middle East. The official church policy of the empire during this era sanctioned waves of killing and persecution. In all, 8 major crusade expeditions occurred between 1096 and 1291. The Crusades prompted the murder of thousands of Jews who were perceived to be just an enemy as the Muslims, for Jews were held responsible for the crucifixion of Christ. The Pope promised forgiveness for all sins to those who, quote, took up the cross and joined the Holy War. A less elaborate version of a cross such as this might have been taken up and carried into battle. The Inquisition was a powerful office set up within the Catholic Church to root out and punish heresy throughout Europe. Beginning in the 12th century and continuing for hundreds of years, the Inquisition is infamous for the severity of its tortures and its persecution of Jews and Muslims. The worst manifestation of persecution was in Spain, where the Spanish Inquisition was a dominant force for more than 200 years, resulting in some 32,000 executions. As the church attempted during the 12th century to prohibit Christians from taking interest on loans from other Christians, which it saw as the sin of usury, it opened the way for Jewish business people who were not governed by this prohibition. So we began to specialize in money lending. Money lenders are never popular. And so emerged a series of slanders, prejudices, and hatreds that plagued Jewish life from the 12th century until today. The subject of this painting concerns a story told in the New Testament where Jesus in the red robe and blue cape came upon merchants and money changers who were defiling the temple through commerce. Declaring it a place of prayer, he forcefully demanded their departure. Jews then became the scapegoats for broader societal malaise. Anything bad that happened could and often would be blamed upon the Jews. During the 14th century, for example, the world was suddenly struck by the devastating bubonic plague. As a result, many European Christians, utterly terrified by the disease, attacked Jews as the alleged source of the catastrophe. They claimed Jews had poisoned the wells. This plaque marked the tomb of a brother and sister who had died of the plague in Germany. The young siblings were just 2 of the 50 million, or 60% of Europe's entire population, that died of the Black Death. By the end of the 14th century, the Jews of England and France had been banished, and the Middle Ages closed with the expulsion of the Jews of Spain in 1492. Now, the church's posture toward life for Jews under the cross can be seen in this painting, where Joseph and Mary exchange their vows. Van Doornik of Holland used architecture to suggest this religious change. The Temple of Jerusalem is depicted as the circular building hidden in the back on the left, and it denotes the age before Christ. The big, huge, elaborate cathedral in the center that you see here signifies a new Christian era when Mary gave birth to Jesus. Out with the old and in with the new. The Dutch, having rid themselves of the fervently Catholic Spaniards, encouraged the return of Jews in the late 16th and 17th century. In pursuit of religious freedoms, many Jews migrated to the Netherlands, where they flourished and were assured the free exercise of their religions. I know we talked about this incredible new acquisition last month, but it is so beautiful. I wanted to remind you all to go see it in person again on the lower level of the museum. The exhibition closes on October 3rd. If you remember, around 1755, Simcha Viterbo embroidered this beautiful Torah ark curtain while living in the ghetto on the Adriatic coast of Italy. While Italy was regarded as a haven for Jews fleeing persecution across Europe, many suffered harsh discrimination and were isolated in ghettos or enclosed in locked neighborhoods. For 3 centuries, from the 16th to the 18th, the ghetto becomes the environment of Jewish communities in Europe. The word ghetto is first used in Venice, where from 1516, the Jews are forced to live in particular areas of the city. They were controlled access, and the name is derived from the Venetian word for an iron foundry, which was previously on the site. As the 18th century developed, Jews in Western Europe were increasingly granted equality before the law. Popular anti-Jewish feeling still played a central role in restricting the full and legal admission of Jews into society, but the equality of all citizens was becoming an essential condition of modernity in most of Europe. In Russia, however, they faced growing persecution and legal restrictions in the Pale of Settlement. During the reign of Catherine II in the 18th century, Jewish people were restricted to the Pale of Settlement, from which Jews were forbidden to migrate into the interior of Russia unless they converted to the Russian Orthodox state religion. Catherine the Great had sent most of her empire Jews there in 1790s. And it's from that the term beyond the pale is derived. In the end of the 19th century, close to 95% of the 5.3 million Jews in the Russian Empire lived in the Pale of Settlement. The Russian Empire at one time hosted the largest population of Jews in the world. Icons such as these are sacred images of the Russian Eastern Orthodox Church that were often painted on wood with tempera by monks in monasteries. Most millennials think of an icon as something that clicks on their computer's desktop, opens a program. However, the original Byzantine icons were religious paintings containing saints and religious figures that were passed from one generation to another. When asked about admitting Jews into the empire, Peter the Great, at the end of the 17th and beginning of the 18th century, stated, "I prefer to see in our midst nations professing Mohammedanism and paganism rather than Jews. They are rogues and cheats. It is my endeavor to eradicate evil, not to multiply it." The Russian Orthodox Church took no steps to protect the Jews. Moreover, many clerics and priests of the Russian Orthodox Church were prone to anti-Semitic attitudes. In fact, the first pogrom of 1903 was led by Eastern Orthodox priests. Beginning in the 1880, waves of anti-Jewish pogroms swept across different regions of the empire for several decades. Where Western Europe was experiencing emancipation at this time, In Russia, the laws for Jewish people were getting worse. Strike at the Jews and save Russia was their motto. A deadly series of pogroms rolled across Western Russia. Hundreds of thousands of desperate refugees left Russia in search of safety and bread and a roof over their head. Meanwhile, 5,000 miles away, the American Revolution is raging. The American Revolution marked a turning point in Jewish history. Never before had a major nation committed itself so definitely to the principles of freedom and democracy in general, and to religious freedom in particular. Jews and members of other minority religions could dissent from the religious views of the majority without fear of persecution. Jews still continued to face various forms of prejudice nationwide, but it was not government-sponsored, rather an individual bigotry. Rembrandt Peale executed many copies of this portrait of George Washington, and his tremendous success testified to the appeal of the conception of the first president as an honorable military hero. He painted 79 portraits of Washington in his life. In August of 1790, 16 months after he became president, George Washington responded to a letter from Moses Saxes, who was warden of the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island. The letter is celebrated as one of the definitive statements of religious freedom under the new Constitution. Washington made clear that our nation's first president would not permit the power of the new government to become an instrument of religious intolerance, and that the children of Israel, after centuries of persecution, had finally found a genuine welcome in this newborn nation. He said, "May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid." Gives me the chills. Okay, I had to include the story of this unsung Jewish hero of the American Revolution, even though this sculpture is not in Slam's collection. Have you ever heard of Chaim Solomon? Have you ever noticed on the back of the dollar bill the arrangement of the 13 stars in the shape of a Star of David? Here is where it is, and this is the Star of David up here. This was ordered by George Washington, who had asked Chaim Solomon, a wealthy Jewish Philadelphia merchant, what he would like as a personal reward for his services to the Continental Army. Solomon said he wanted nothing for himself, but he would like something for the Jewish people. The Star of David was the result. So who was Solomon? Well, Solomon played a significant role in saving the newly established United States from financial ruin. He was a principal financier of the fledgling American Republic. Solomon raised massive amounts of money for George Washington's war effort. One estimate was over $650,000. In today's dollars, that's easily over 16 million. The American Revolutionary War couldn't have been won without this unknown Jewish hero. He gave his adult life and his financial estate to support the war effort. Sadly, Solomon died bankrupt 4 years later at the age of 44. The government which he had helped never could repay the debts owed to him. In the centuries spanning the years 1820 through 1924, an increasingly steady flow of Jews made their way to America, culminating in a massive surge of immigrants. Many of our grandparents were part of this migration. In the first half of the 19th century, Jewish immigrants came mostly, though not exclusively, from Central Europe. During this period, there was an almost 100-fold increase in America's Jewish population, from some 3,000 in 1820 to 300,000 in 1880. Between 81 and 1924, the migration shifted from Central Europe eastward, with over 2.5 million Eastern European Jews propelled from their native lands by persecution. The majority of those who arrived as part of this huge influx settled in cities like New York, where they clustered in districts close to downtowns, worked in the trades, spoke Yiddish, and built strong networks of cultural and social organizations. George Lukes, the painter of Houston Street, was known for his confident brushwork and his colorful palette. He walked the streets of Lower Manhattan, where he found subjects for his paintings everywhere. His paintings of Jewish and other ethnic immigrants in Manhattan became his trademark. Back in Western Europe at the beginning of the 20th century, Germany had a thriving Jewish population. Jews had lived in Germany since Roman times. They were well integrated into German society. This 19th century achievement, however, was fragile and was therefore easily destroyed with the rise of 20th century racist ideologies. The future, as we know, was horrific. The artists we will see next painted their response to the ominous world of early 20th century Germany. These artists became known as German Expressionists, bound together by the belief that art should reflect the ugliness and the turbulent world around them. Slam has one of the strongest collections of German Expressionist art outside of Germany, with great works like you see here. Let's talk a bit about them. I think that Germany at the beginning of the 20th century was much like the play Cabaret. On the surface, at first glance, it appears carefree and uninhibited, but by the end of the story, Cabaret shows us a contrasting and underlying vision, the destruction of personal lives and the growing menace of Nazi power. In Cabaret, our worries should be over. Remember Joel Grey singing Willkommen in 3 languages. But as he later reads Mein Kampf and sings to the fatherland, the ominous and shrouded violence and hatred in Germany is exposed. All is not what it appears to be. Cabaret recognized it, and so did the German Expressionists. No sooner had the century begun than the German Expressionists were turning out pictures notable for their agitated brushwork. And their shrieking color is either on steroids or having a nervous breakdown. Look at these works and let's be honest. Many think German Expressionism is difficult and at best off-putting. It's not pretty, it's not agreeable, but these German Expressionists with their distortions and compressions, their heavy blackness and uneasy colors speak so eloquently of trouble to come. Germany was like a bubbling cauldron. It was the artists who visualized and painted the corruption, the deeper tensions of hatred and violence. They used jagged, distorted lines, rough, rapid brushstroke, jarring colors to depict their emotionally charged atmosphere. They were reacting to the ugliness that they discerned in modern life. These paintings that you see here may make us uncomfortable, but that was the whole point. We react to the discordance, just like Cabaret reacting to the cancer underneath. A group of artists led by Ernst Kirschner kicked things off in 1905. His jittery, angular figures define German Expressionism. This painting is a masterpiece in our collection. In this flattened and compacted composition, he evokes the energy of the circus arena. But where is the viewer? The angle is wrong, it's off kilter. To Kirschner, so was his world. It was most certainly off kilter. The circus was a metaphor for the folly of society and its hidden threats. Kirschner's focus was on the harsh realities of modern urban life in Germany. The tension of the work alludes to the danger of the circus, and by extension, the danger in society as a whole. The next 2 artists are part of the German Expressionist movement, but are also Jewish, and these last stories are unique. Ludwig Meidner is considered to be one of the most important representatives of German Expressionism. Meidner gained renown for street scenes that included a series of what we call apocalyptic landscapes. The prophetically envisioned the German city in catastrophic collapse, and you can see that here. Ours is an example of those chaotic and explosive paintings. These works are about ruins and wreckage and devastation. As the Nazi Party gained momentum in the 30s, the artist fled to London. In England, he created a series of haunting and harrowing drawings on the persecution of Jews in Europe. The caricatures and paintings by George Gross provided some of the most vitriolic social criticism of his time. His best-known works are visions of the seamy side of German metropolitan life, of social decadence and political corruption. His work shaped our picture of what German capital was like in the Weimar years. In this satirical painting, the bloated figures represent the well-fed, greedy leaders of capitalist society, whom the artist saw as a source of many social ills. Anticipating the Nazi rise to power, Gross left Germany in 1932 and emigrated to the United States. The Nazis labeled him cultural Bolshevist #1, and Gross's books, which contained many of his best-known plays, were thrown into the flames during the book burning of 1933. A French critic called his work the most definitive catalog of men's depravity of all time. One last piece. No talk about German art in the St. Louis Art Museum in the first half of the 20th century is complete without referencing Max Beckmann. Outside of Germany, our museum houses the largest public collection of his works in the world, 39 paintings and 430 prints and drawings. He is sometimes thrown into the mix with other German expressionists, but he claimed not to be part of any art movement. At a time when many of his contemporaries were experimenting with abstraction, Beckmann filled his paintings with myths and Bible stories and allegories, often interspersed with scenes and figures from his own life. He seldom wrote about his work, and so the meaning or symbolism of his work is difficult to decipher. Deeply impacted by both world wars and his exile from Germany, Beckmann's work typically integrated tragic themes with expressionistic brushwork and harsh colors. This vertical jumble of figures in this painting is filled with unusual yet symbolic imagery, as in a dream. At the center, an innocent blonde girl holds a doll that is the only figure with open eyes. It's a commentary on the fact that no one sees what's happening in the world around them. They're oblivious and indifferent and detached. They may as well have been blind. The dream reflects Max Beckmann's observations and deeply felt experiences in the carnage of World War I and symbolizes the troubled state of post-war Germany. Beckmann is acknowledged today as one of Germany's leading 20th century artists. One of his paintings sold for a whopping $45 million at auction in 2017. These artists featured here, as well as many others in our collection, loaded their canvases with works that were raw, deeply emotive, and at times shocking. These artists and many more that we don't have time to talk about today pushed the unconscionable to its outrageous extreme. Their work turned out to be disturbingly prophetic. Once again, we're so glad you were able to join us on our second journey through Jewish Art at Slam. I hope that when you are ready to visit the museum, you'll look for these pieces and others that connect to our Jewish history, and maybe look at them all with a different perspective. Today, we began a long journey, beginning with Mesopotamia and ending with German Expressionism. I hope it wasn't too confusing. It was a lot of history to put into just 1 hour, and it did not come close to the whole picture. As our Israeli guide always said, our Jewish story is complicated. Next month, we will be definitely less complicated, but really impactful. We will see that the major events of the 20th century for the Jewish people, World War II and the Holocaust, had lasting effects on many post-war German artists featured at Slam. Their work is fascinating and thought-provoking. I promise you will be blown away. We will also highlight the incredible Jewish donors that donated these works and many others that helped make the St. Louis Art Museum the world-class museum that it is today. We hope you will be able to join us for our next look at Jewish Artist Slam. So take care and stay safe, and we will see you next month. So thank you all for joining us. Do we have any questions or?
I don't see any in the chat. Does anyone have? Al, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, Judith, first of all, Dale, your presentations are always amazing and informative. But a question for Judith. Oh, and also Dale, Barry's humor is very dry, but that's okay. Judith, is it possible sometime in the future for the Merowitz Center to give us a list of the various pieces of art that Dale reflects at each one of the presentations, so that when we go to the museum, we can look for those specific pieces?
Well, I can work with Dale and maybe we can come up with a list, at least many of them.
Yeah,
That would be,
thank you.
I could work with Dale. Okay.
I think for the last one, we sent one out, didn't we?
I think we might have, but I will check.
I think we did.
Okay.
And I'll go over it and put them into, I'll try also, Al, to put what gallery they're in, if that would help, for when you go.
Yeah, he likes that idea. So
Okay.
we'll try to get that out to you,
Thank you.
in an email. Oh, you're welcome. So do we have other questions today? We're getting close to time, but if you have a question.
I
Yeah.
can't believe nobody's correcting my pronunciation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated this. I know you are recording the sessions. I missed the first one, and I want to know how we can access it.
Well, Carol, it's on our Merowitz Center website, but I can send you all the link of the first one in the event that you would like to have that. But they are all recorded and in a library, so to speak, on our merowitzcenter.org website. So I will send the previous link of the Dale's first one to you, though, so that you'll have that. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I think
I
that's.
have a,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, this is Marilyn. I have a comment too along those lines. Perhaps at the end of the series, we could all receive all the links to the recordings, plus the full listing of all the pieces discussed throughout the series. And then we'll have that all in one place.
Well, I can, all the 4 series recordings will be in one place on the website, and you'll see, series 1, 2, 3, 4, and, click here, and Dale, we can compile a list, so we can share that with everyone.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
maybe we should send them out as we go along, so
Yeah.
while it's fresh,
Yeah.
in case we happen to go to the museum.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good.
If you could do today's, then along with last month's, that would be good, because I'm not sure I have what might have been sent last month.
Well, we'll figure that out, and I will get that off to you. All right, everyone. Oh, okay, you are all welcome. Thank you, Dale, for a wonderful program again. So much information to process, and it is, I'm glad we're recording it because it helps to refresh, or revisit some of the topics that you covered, because it was really very informational. And we want to thank you so very much for all the work that you put into this and the wonderful presentation that you've had. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for joining, and stay safe. And we hope to see you next month. Next month won't be quite as many, it won't have the dates and it just won't jump 5,000 years. We'll only be in just about 50. So should be a little bit easier. So,
All right.
okay,
Thank you.
thanks a lot, you guys.
All right.
Everybody
Bye,
stay well.
everyone.
Thanks for coming.